This is the test review for 11A. Sorry, this is a remediation for 11A.2. If you need additional examples, do go back and look at that test review for 11.2 so you can have additional practice. So this part is all about trying to use certain properties of functions and evaluating functions. So before, we just used to have expressions. Now we'll actually have more likely equations where it says f of x. That's how we read this f parentheses x. So we normally use f for function, but we can use any letter we like. Notice the thing in parentheses is the x. So when you see something like this, f of -1/2, it means that the thing in the parentheses, in this case -1/2, is actually x. So we're just substituting -1/2 into this formula. Now, there's several different ways that we can do this. And for easy questions, this might be a little bit over the top, but it will guarantee that we get the question correct. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in the question. Now, it says -2x + 5. And I'm going to change the x into an a. And the reason I want to do that is so I can use this slider here. And then once I have my slider, I can set it to any number that I like. So I want -1/2. So I'm just typing in -1/2. Now this number down here, that's just -1/2 as a fraction. If I click on it down here, you can see that that's true. So what I'm interested in is what is the value of this? And as you can see here, it is 6. So I'm going to go ahead and select 6. So when I'm evaluating expressions, this is a really useful tool to use. If it's already a letter that's not x and y, then you can just type it in as it is, add the slider, and then just say what this number is and let the calculator do the evaluating for you. So question 3, I couldn't type in x squared, unfortunately, on here. So this is x squared minus 4x plus 1. And this time I have to plug -2 into this function. And they did use g of x this time. And once again, as I'm typing this in, I'm not going to be using x. I am going to be using a. So a squared minus 4a in this case. And I think it said plus 1, but I am going to go back and check just to make sure. Yes, a squared minus 4a plus 1. And I want -2 as my value. So I click slider. And then over the top here, I can just type -2 and it'll evaluate it for me. So I can see the answer to this is 13. So I'm going to go ahead and select 13. So these questions are self-working. We just have to know how to use the technology to help us for this. What is the range of the function h of x equals -4x plus 10 when the domain is -2, -1, 2, and 4? So we've got a little bit extra vocabulary here. Range refers to the y values or the output of the function, whereas domain is the x values or values you are inputting into the function. So this time I want to plug all of these numbers into this formula here. And as there's 4 numbers, perhaps not surprisingly, there's 4 answers for each of these. So let's type in the question. So it's -4x plus 10. I'm going to put -4a plus 10 because I can't use an x. And let's go back and look at what the first value is. So it says the first value is -2. So as I type in -2, I can see that that gives me an 18. Now, as I go back and look at my answers, I can actually already pick the correct answer for this because answer A doesn't have 18 in it, neither does C, and neither does D. So I'm pretty confident that it is this one. I can check the remaining values by plugging these in as well. So I can see -1 on here. Gives me 14. And that's good because that's what that says here. Next one is 2. Now, also, it doesn't have to be in the correct order necessarily. If I had 18 over here on the end, that could still be a correct answer. It just looks like they've made this a little easier for us to check the answers. And the last 2 values to plug in are 2 and 4. So 2 gives us an answer of 2, and 4 gives us an answer of -6. Whoops. And you can see indeed that are all the 4 answers for this time. So sometimes they ask you to do just a little bit more, just to make sure. Okay, question 4. Given the function f of x equals 7x minus 5, find the value of x when f of x equals 16. So notice this time, this is a slightly different question. They didn't say that x is 16, because they've asked us to find the value of x. So what this actually means is that this here equals 16. So basically what they're asking us to solve is this equation. What does 7x minus 5 equals 16? Now, I did type it in with the x this time, not the a, because I'm not substituting in a value, but this is the equation I want to solve. Now, we could solve this equation by hand. If I add 5 to both sides, I would get 21. And if I divide both sides by 7, I would get 3. But notice by typing in the equation in Desmos, it will actually solve the equation for you as well, just by looking at the x-intercept. So the answer to this question is x equals 3. Still important we don't forget these methods by hand, because sometimes the questions will come out as horrible fractions that Desmos will not be able to work out for us. Word problem, the normal systolic blood pressure S is a function of the age A of the individual. That is, a person's normal blood pressure depends on how old the person is. To determine the normal systolic blood pressure of an individual, you can use the equation S equals 0.5A plus 110. So really what I'm looking for is I'm looking for that equation and I'm looking to see what I'm actually doing with this. It does tell us what the variable are. So A represents the age in years, and we have to find the blood pressure, that's what S is, for a person who is 30 years old. So in other words, in this question, A, the age in years, we know that the age is 30. So I'm substituting in 30 for A. So I'm not setting it equal to 30, I'm setting A as 30. So I'm going to type in that equation on the next part. So it said 0.5A plus 110. I'm going to use my slider to set it to 30. And then I can see that the blood pressure is 125. And I can see that that's one of my answers. So I'm feeling pretty confident at this point. Now, question 6 and 7 were probably the ones that people did struggle on the most because it's understanding how to read the actual graph itself. And there's two different ways. They can either give you the X value and you have to find the Y value, or vice versa. So if the number's in parentheses, like it is in this question, then we know this is the X value. So I'm going to take a reading from this graph. So I'm going to start from 1 on the X-axis, and then I'm going to move away from the X-axis until I get to the graph. And then I'm going to stop. And then from here, I'm just going to read to the Y-axis because I'm trying to find the Y value. And I know this doesn't have a scale on it, but you can probably figure out -1, -2, and -3. Now, just so we can practice on other ones as well, if you were asked to do, for example, excuse me, if you were asked to do f of -1, once again, as it's in parentheses, I know this is the X value. I would go to -1 on the X value, on the X-axis. I would move away from the X-axis until I get to the graph. And then once I get to the graph, I move across to the Y-axis so I can read off this value. So this would be -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. I'll make up one last question just so you can see how this works. If you were asked to do f of 3, so 3 is in parentheses. Once again, I know this is the X value. 1, 2, 3. So I would start from 3 on the X-axis. I would read down until I get to the graph, or up in some cases, move away from the X-axis. And then once I get to the graph, read straight across to the Y-axis and then figure out what this number here would be. So in this case, -1. So hopefully that will help you to be able to read those graphs. And obviously you won't get exactly the same graph, but it's more important about how you actually read the graph. Now I'm going to show 12 and I'm going to go back to 11 just so you can see. So it's the same picture, but this time it says find X. So that's your first clue. So we're not plugging in for X this time, but it says if f of X equals 2. So notice the 2 is not in parentheses either. So this is not the X value. So therefore this must be the Y value. So on the other one, notice it said find f of 1. So the thing that we were looking for was in parentheses. So that was my X value. But on this one, it says find X. So we know it's not the X value, but also the 2 is not in parentheses. So that means the Y value is 2. So I have to do this one in reverse. So I'm going to the Y axis this time to 2. And then I'm going to read across. I'm going to move away from the Y axis until I get to the graph. Once I get to that graph, I'm going to read down to the X axis because I'm trying to find an X value this time. So before, on the previous question, we kind of went up or down and then across. For this one, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to go across and then we're going to go up or down. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So that would be my correct answer for this question. Now, just to make up another couple, just to make sure, because this was one of the questions that people did struggle on. For example, if I was to ask f of -5, I would go down to -5. Sorry, if I was asked when does f of x equal -5? So -5 is not in parentheses, so that means it's the y value. -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. So down here, I would then read across to the graph, which is here, and then I would read up until I get to the x-axis, and then I would look at what this number is here. So my value that makes the answer -5 would be -1. And these questions are a little bit more difficult to do because I have to pick unique values out. And I think for that reason, that's probably the only question I can really ask for those two. So if necessary, go back and just rewind the video a little bit, perhaps watch the last minute again, but hopefully those two examples will help you to work these out. But take a quick look as you're reading through questions. See if it's giving you the x value, particularly if it's in parentheses, or if it's giving you the y value where it's not in parentheses, and it'll probably ask you find x. So those will be your clues. As mentioned at the start of the video, don't forget, go back and watch the test review as well for this unit as well. This will work perfectly well, and there'll be some additional problems there that you can try. And hopefully between this and that original test review, that should be enough for you to be prepared for the retest.